Welcome to the Cove Podcast, your stop for PME on the go.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Cove Podcast. I'm Captain Todd Lemper, your regular host. And on today's episode, so again, we have video. So come back if you're not already watching it on Spotify and YouTube, please do so. We'll try to maintain a good rhythm of video from now on. Today's episode is on combat experimentation. We're going to talk, it's off the back of, I suppose, I did an episode with DGFLW, Future Land Warfare. We did one with Lieutenant Colonel Tommy Gaines on Project Convergence and experimentation in the US. And subsequently did a episode not too long ago about adaptation in the Ukraine. So this is an extension of that, and it is the Australian, I suppose we're talking about Australian combat experimentation. My guest today is Lieutenant Colonel Jake Penley, the CEO of One Armoured. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. Thanks for having me on. It's great.
Amazing. His second year in the job this year, being CEO of One Armoured, first year of experimentation. I suppose we normally go into warfighters, and I want to start with your first exercise of the year first, I suppose, but we normally start with warfighters, trying to achieve training level outcomes, and we deliver a command directive that talks about training levels and stuff. You went into your first warfighter this year solely focused on experimentation. How different was that between training levels and now getting after some awesome experimentation?
Yeah. It was fundamentally different in every respect. So obviously everybody knows that First Arm has changed from an ACR, what it was last year, an Armoured Cavalry Regiment, into an experimentation unit. In doing so, we were trying to sort of figure out where we fit in a training continuum as well. Commander 3 Brigade at the start of the year opened up an opportunity for us to be involved in his warfighter through the chain of command, which there was no real plan about that, but we kind of know that people in every unit should have some sets and reps in terms of tactical training that they're getting after, being good at their job. And I think that's where it kind of started. In the weeks between when that opportunity became available and actually deploying, we did a couple of things with DSTG to figure out how can we use that to really get after our new role in experimentation. And that meant that we did develop a crawl, walk, run of sorts, but it was really focused on how the unit would conduct itself in a war game. So we did a series of war games with DSTG in the lead up to it, and each one kind of involved more people. And
Defence Science and Technology.
Yep. And then they came with us. So as a small team under Dr. Andrew Coots came with us to the North Queensland War Fighter, and we set up a bunch of tents and we went through some analytical wargaming. And in doing so, it really meant that we had to have a mindset change in terms of we're not just living in a crawl, walk, run like you put it before in terms of getting to a tactical competency level. We already had to come in at the tactical competency level and rely on the experience of the people in the team at First Armoured Regiment and being assisted by DSTG to really then focus on the warfighting functions as you've seen in the report, and then draw out the experimentation learnings from there.
Was it weird to have, suppose you talked about being tactically ready before you went, but to have those training levels subservient to the science and testing some of these concepts that we're just about to go into? But was that a weird shift, I suppose, from a CEO's perspective?
Yeah, it was. And it's a bit daunting as well because, those are also activities where everybody's kind of exposed to a degree. So it really makes you focus when you're back in barracks before you deploy on making sure that people have the right skills and attributes, making sure that they're rehearsed in the right doctrine before you set out, because all these skills are perishable. So you got part of daily life in any regiment, I guess, or a unit focusing on PME. That was a significant backbone of our preparation. First Armoured's had a long history of a big focus on PME every Thursdays, and we still maintain that. So that helped. The stuff with DSTG team helped significantly, it was good.
I was just about to ask why you did it in Townsville. Obviously, you're based in Adelaide and you've gone up to Townsville, but that was because you were under the umbrella of 3 Brigade. You fought with 3 Brigade. Is that the
Yeah.
idea?
So we were attached to 3 Brigade. CTC were fantastic in the way that they just opened the door for us, and they wrote us into the script so that we were an attachment to 3 Brigade for the warfighter. And then they scripted us out at the back end because it's a very difficult thing to do, right? You've got a constructive force that's in a tent focused on wargaming and in a bit of a different time cycle to what the rest of the brigade's doing. So when the rest of the brigade's playing out a tactical action over, the whole thing went for a number of days, obviously, but each main event might go for 12 hours or 24 hours before reconsolidation and then adapt and move in the tactical situation. We might have done that 2 or 3 times in the same 24-hour period. So marrying those timelines up is sometimes difficult, but us being physically there next to CTC, co-located, meant that I could also interface with Commander 3 Brigade like a normal CO would, and then bring that intent back and make sure that we were really benefiting from the whole wrap that CTC can provide like nobody else can. So yeah, it was important that we went up there to do that.
I suppose that's the commander's intent piece is important, because I'll just ask you about the tactical actions that you were, or the sort of purpose of the task you had to undertake as part of the experiment. Before I do that, so you fly into Townsville. I don't know. Did you fly, sir?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
So you fly into Townsville and you set up. What's it look like on the ground when you start to set up an experiment? Basically, what does it look like?
Yeah, mate, it was kind of my first time, so we just sort of made it up as we went. But what it ended up being was we begged, borrowed and stole a bunch of equipment, tents, tables, maps. We pretty much ran Laverack Barracks out of map printing capability because the way that we conducted ourselves was on analytical wargaming. So we needed reams and reams of hard copy maps. So what you would have seen us on the ground is when you drove into the hard standing at TFTA range entry, you would see the CTC and the cubic setup that were facilitating the overall battle group warfighter, the brigade warfighter, and we were sort of in a set of 11x11s tacked onto the side near the mess. We had a CP, which was a normal CP, which everybody would have or most people would have experienced in terms of a unit level command post. That was next to the wargaming tent, and then we had another 2 11x11s set up, which housed the combat teams. The combat teams each had a headquarters and a table similar to this, which had all their mapping and their data on it. And that allowed them to do combat team level planning and tactical actions. And then there was a larger map area and tent where DSTG and the enemy party supplied by the Battle Lab were able to play out the actual action when we went into the different time cycles that I mentioned before. In addition to that, we had a server tent, which our SIGs sat in, held the Dolores server, which we had also serving us on the warfighter as well. So that was a good sort of thing to be able to focus on and see how that could integrate into a brigade headquarters into the future as well, or battle group headquarters.
Yeah, so with the wargaming, so you've got a command post, and then beside it is the wargaming tent.
Yep.
How does that play out in terms of, many of us have done some sort of analog wargaming in the past, but how does that sort of play out in that tent? And like, who's the adjudicator, and is it getting heated at times and stuff before you get into the tactical task? But yeah.
So one of the benefits of the analytical wargaming over simulation is that you can really drill down into some of the things that you want to get after. And you can either do that deliberately, or you can, as you are conducting the wargame itself, you kind of get vectored onto something which you're like, actually, we need to focus on this, so you can pause and reestablish at a lower level. So what sort of weaponry does the enemy have, and what do we have, and how long can something loiter for, and what's the range of this system? What was really good is that you just go into that with a very good understanding of who has primacy of decision at the end. In an analytical wargame like that, it was the DSTG team had primacy in decision. They are the adjudicator. They sit between the red and the blue four, and they kind of have all the tab data. Like, so it's not just them. It's not just a gut feel. Obviously,
yeah.
They have a very detailed understanding of all the tab data of every system that we put forward as part of the synthetic or the constructive battle group that we designed. They monitor things like how long UAS has been in the air for, so you can't just have that up there forever.
Yeah, because you just say the normal thing is like, can you see this? And you're like, yeah, I've had a drone up there for 24 hours. It's like nothing has that endurance. Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
So they keep tabs of all that sort of stuff as each turn occurs, and then with that knowledge, they'll also then bring probability into it, right? So it really allows the enemy, the terrain to be understood, the systems that you're using to be understood in great detail, and then the probability, so the unknown of a tactical situation is brought in through the roll of a dice, and that has some probability statements that it's aligned to, and it basically goes off percentages in terms of, all right, so if you're using a given system from a concealed area, you've had to expose your team briefly to fire it or activate it, but you're then back in a concealed location when it activates, whatever the system is, then that means that you're fighting from a concealed position in this tactical situation with this force against that enemy force, and they're using these types of systems to try and outmaneuver you. That all leads to an actual percentage in terms of what's likely to occur and what's unlikely to occur, and the roll of the dice allows that chance to come into it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so that, I suppose, that sets the preconditions for the exercise. So you've got your infill, you've got a physical space and some terrain to maneuver in, and then you have a wargaming or a command post and a wargaming set up, and DSCG is supporting that with like some excellent tab data. What tactical tasks did you get after, and how were they set?
That was kind of difficult to figure out how we were going to do that and really focus on without just making up a whole other scenario that was already difficult enough to bolt all that, what I just described, onto the flank of a North Queensland War Fighter. So we just played it with a straight bat as we saw it. We acted as a battle group within 3 Brigade. We got off the ship once they lodged. We then moved into a urban environment to do some security tasks on the western flank of 3 Brigade within their overall picture. And then we moved down towards Charters Towers. And so there was, lodgement, some urban security focused tactical tasks. Then there was a march further south as part of a brigade. Then there was establishment of a brigade assembly area, a breakout from the assembly area. And we played large, and obviously an offensive move south. We played a large part in all of that. And we would just, CTC and expertly wrote us into the scenario as we could, and we sort of massaged everything else at the command level through my back briefs to the commander and his intent to us.
And so so you've got a number of tactical tasks you've written into the orders, and you're getting the commander's intent, so you know exactly where you need to go. So the soldiers get thrown all this tech, I imagine. I'm probably romanticising, but I imagine they get thrown all this tech, and they're stepping off for these tactical tasks.
Yep.
You tested C2 or command and control, ISR, manoeuvre, fires, sustainment, protection, some other sort of things. I suppose if we start with C2 in the command post itself, but also, sensors coming back and feeding data in, what sort of stuff did you test, and what were the outcomes for the C2 component of the warfighter?
Yeah. So the C2, in terms of battle group headquarters, we focused on sit-aware working with TAC. So we had a TAC system which allowed us to take everything that was on sit-aware and push it down to the combat teams.
And TAC is tactical assault kit.
Correct. Yeah. Sorry. Yep. So we have laptop versions of it, and also the version that sits on an end user device like a Samsung that's on your chest in body armor. So the combat teams had the end user device. In the battle group headquarters, we had a laptop system, and we would push the tactical tasks down across that. That wasn't necessarily the focus. I think the outcome of a lot of the C2 focused experimentation really informed what we kind of don't know, or confirmed what we don't know and what we've got to get after. And there are some really excellent things coming out of Army headquarters in how to make that, how to synthesize that more in terms of the C2 area. And it is no sort of surprise that one of the main things that we found, particularly when you talk about the operation of the 2, how the S2 or the intelligence team integrate with the 3, the proliferation of information that comes through different sensors, the ability to rack and stack that in a priority order, analyze it, and then push that across to the 3, and then collaboratively come up with a tactical plan or adapt the plan that you're within. People are working very hard to get that sort of amount of information processed.
Because there's still a lot of human input into that, sort of sensors picking up a plethora. We talked about it in Colonel Ella Smith's episode on the Ukraine. From the flight back kilometres, you are getting complete saturation. Do you know what I mean? So you get all of the sense, and you would have got the same significant data points and all this sort of stuff to come back. But humans are still relied upon a fair bit to get that useful information into the 3 shop or into the operation shop to be able to action that, through a fire cycle or something like that.
Yeah. I think overall what the war game proved is that the systems that we have now in terms of C2, the expectation, and it includes everything from the basic use of SMEAC all the way up to the DMPP and a planning cycle that we would use across the force, it is validated because you need to be able to fall back on the known knowns. What we found was that when you're sitting in a battle group CP and you have this information pouring in, and so if you can sort of picture it, we're in one tent, I'm in that tent. I could sort of move between tents when I needed to, or when things just simply didn't make sense. I go speak to the DSTG guys. That would be playing a scenario would be playing out on the map in the next tent, right, with combat team commanders and everybody around the table rolling dice, DSTG there, the enemy party there, understanding what they're going to do. That information's fed back up through the TAC and through sit-aware, through the normal sort of C2 systems. And this proliferation of information is just overloading people in the CP. And it's about understanding what to do and when. And overall, what we found significantly was that, getting that information and making sure that it's provided to the right person at the right time was very difficult. and will continue to be difficult until we can increase these systems that assist us with filtering that information to what's useful then and there.
Sort of automating some of it.
Yeah, I think so. Into the future, there's definitely space for some automated assistance there. But when you think about a combat team in an urban environment, for example, and if you, so the way that we designed the battle group was platforms and systems of uncrewed and crewed variants that are theoretically attainable within the next 2 years. So if we had the resources and the ability to go and purchase stuff off the shelf or what's already in development now through Australian industry, bring that together into a battle group. That's what our battle group looked like, and we can talk about what some of those parts of the ORBAT were. But suffice to say, there was a lot of sensors down low, like acoustic sensors, IR sensors, different types of EW sensing equipment of varying classifications, and that really means that the DSTG team would sit there and be like, okay, so you've got all these sensors out, and then you've just seen X, Y, and Z. You've seen that pop up over here. You've seen some normal civilian traffic over there. So sometimes it just means that you're seeing a lot more, but you still don't really know how to filter that information, and you still don't really know exactly, well, what do I have to do when and where. So even something as simple as that doesn't even make it to the battle group headquarters before the C2 at the corporal section commander level really needs to decide, well, now I personally have all this. My cognitive load has just skyrocketed because I can see so much more. I've got to decide what I'm going to do about every single thing now, what I'm going to ignore, what I'm going to give a warning order to go and identify something with a human team. Am I going to send up a UAS or a UAV to go and identify what I've just heard or seen on this system? What are my thresholds for that? What's my triggers for release? So all of those systems and the C2 systems that we currently have just get reinforced of how important they are, the more uncrewed systems are laid on top of them.
Yeah. I suppose with that, if we move into, which you've already done, move into the ISR component, what were the secos flying? What were the soldiers on the ground flying or sort of, controlling to be able to get all of this ISR back?
Yeah. So we used, as I said, it's touched on before, a various array of sensors, already spoken about IR, acoustic, EW, obviously normal video feed, and bringing them together without you can't just take a section of soldiers and just
throw something at them.
Give them like 50 different things. Like we apportion them logically across the different units or subunits. They then used basically quadcopters of various forms, everything that we currently have, like Parrots, all the way through to different types of ISR drones and FPV drones to be able to move forward and reinforce what those sensors have already found. The way that we kind of operate, everybody will be familiar with the forward line of own troops, which is, the line that is closest to the enemy, is the most in danger of direct contact with the enemy, line or position. With the systems that we were using in the battle group, and that are likely going to be acquired by our military in the short to midterm, you get to a place where you have this contact gradient, right? So in front of the forward line of own troops, you have a forward line of own robots, right? And that would be a system, a series of systems that have kinetic and non-kinetic effectors, and it is a certain distance in front of the flot, and that's going to be dependent on terrain and dependent on the ability for connectivity to actually make things work. And then in front of the forward line of own robots, there is a forward line of own sensors, and which is what we're talking about now. So that really pushes, like if you think like it's the old onion layer sort of analogy, that pushes the ability for a combat team or whatever size force to really have a further reach. So sometimes that means, okay, if you're a section commander or a platoon commander in that situation, your ability to see and affect things has gone from a few hundred meters in some cases to a couple of kilometers or 20 or 30 kilometers in some cases. What does that mean for tasked area of operations and the size of them? What does that mean for what you have to do and what your triggers are, what your authorities are? Because you're now seeing so much further. You can affect so much more, and you can inform so much more for the flanking call signs as well. So yeah, it was is a lot of information that just comes out of one.
I'm just getting a picture of you walking out of the tent. They're just, I'm definitely over romanticizing, but like there's just stuff going on everywhere. Like it's busy.
Yeah.
There would be periods of like slow time where they're trying to nut out the nuts and guts of it, and the scientists are getting in there trying to assess things. But there would be periods where it's super busy. I imagine there's just things going on the whole time. Is that fair to say.
Yeah, definitely. Like when the team is actually wargaming, we were only doing it for 4 to 6 or 7 hours at a time. So you can imagine 3 Brigade doing their thing on the warfighter, right? That team is running hard for a long time, in the field, living tactically, hard conditions, difficult training, and then 24 hours a day. And if you want to move a battle group from point A to point B, that takes a lot of time. It takes consideration and planning, and someone's got to actually do that. When you're wargaming, you don't have all that to sort of play out. So there were some times when there was a bit of a lull in our side of the battle, and it was a difficult task at times for us, CTC and DSTG, to really understand where we were in the timeline. But that meant that, you're right, on occasions I would come out and there would just be a huge amount of activity. There'd be like 20 people huddled around a map, having a discussion about a specific tactical action or a tactical task or a plan they're about to enact, all the way up to just like rolling the dice. And sometimes they'd be ticking over pretty quick, right? And actions are happening quite fast. And then that means something for the battle group headquarters, because how are we going to report that back in, and what does that mean to 3 Brigade, and what's happening on their western flank, and how does it work? Sometimes there was a huge amount of activity. Sometimes there was people waiting for the battle group headquarters to catch up and disseminate all this information we spoke about, rack and stack it appropriately, and then actually spit out a coherent order. So what I should probably do as well is to set the conditions for the North Queensland War Fighter. We had a series of I spoke about the lead up training with DSTG and focused on analytical wargaming, but there was also a series of activities that we did. Not a typical crawl, walk, run scenario, but we refer to them as our Black series, our Blackprints series. Blackprints is a name that we've taken and laid over our training continuum for the year, or experimentation continuum. It's taken from British World War II experimentation that they did on remotely operated tanks, the Matilda. They remotely operated some Matildas as part of an experiment for mine clearing. So we've taken that name, Armoured Core sort of lineage, dragged it forward, and we now have Blackprints 1, 2, and 3. So Blackprints 1 and Blackprints 2 was focused on industry coming to 1st Armoured Regiment, providing instruction to our soldiers and officers on the systems that are to be used, or we were using as part of the Army Headquarters directed intent for us for 2025. And there were things in there from the Jaeger explosive UGV, the D40, which is the drone 40, which many people would be familiar with, various types of quadcopters, the Banshee explosive UGV, the MRV, which is it used to be called the OCCV. It's an AS4, which has been had some automation placed onto it, so optionally crewed vehicles, and many other systems. That is used physically in Coltana or in Chevelle Lines down in Adelaide. They do training with the industry on the systems. Then we look to use them in small teams, and then look to use them in medium to large teams. And I sort of use the word teams deliberately. I don't want to say section, platoon, whatever, because part of the experimentation and using those systems for the first time is figuring out exactly where they fit. Are they something that's operated by a pair? Does it need a whole section? Is this a platoon level thing? Where does the authority lie for this? Is it a platoon commander authority? Is it a company commander authority? And so that we build that from the ground up when we get any individual system. So by the time we deployed on the North Queensland War Fighter in a wargaming function, many of the systems that we'd already been used or were using on that, we had already used physically in the field. So the ability to understand how they should be employed was kind of already there. And then what the North Queensland War Fighter really allowed us to do was test some hypotheses that we developed in Blackprints 1 and Blackprints 2, and then really understand, is it a valid use of that system? Does it work? What are the logistics considerations like we've got here on a ship? What are the littoral considerations for this? Because it's just, adds a whole nother dimension.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Trade space logistics is just power management. We should probably get into that at some stage, because that's a whole situation. That's another line of logistics that should be viewed as ammunition, water, fuel, like power distribution, management, generation is going to be significant moving forward. So you get all these cherries that fall out of that sort of line of
lead up training. Yeah. So I talked about you walking out of the tent on the Warfighter before and saying, like, I'm over romanticising, but there's lots of stuff going on, right? But it's the same back at barracks. So you're walking out of your office on barracks and seeing like all of this random stuff, science. They all wear black polos, I imagine, and they're all just cruising around in black polos, helping your soldiers use the kit for the first time, and they're your soldiers are getting after things in an unconventional way. Because I think we focus a lot on what we should have, what capabilities we should have, or what, I wouldn't even say capabilities. We focus a lot on what platforms we should have. But I think the broader emphasis behind what you do and what we should be getting after is why we have those things and how we use them, because it's not that capability or platforms focus doesn't get us to the point of like using this tech, adapting, doing really good stuff with the stuff that we've got as well. Like, is that what it's like when you walk out of your office? It's just like heaps of different toys and like all these soldiers getting, time with industry and scientists and stuff as well.
Yeah, it certainly, on occasions, yes. As part of our change to an experimentation unit, where you go through the normal forming, storming sort of phase, and that happens with industry as well. I've personally never had so much interface with industry partners directly, and you typically don't get that in the jobs that you and I have had over the years and living and working in units. And that's been interesting. So sometimes they come in and the industry partner is fantastic. The way that they approach training is sort of what we'd expect anyway. Sometimes it's sort of less so, which can be difficult. So there can be long lead times. So you might, if you're an industry partner, you might deliver whatever platform, right? And it arrives at our Q store, it's receipted in, it's provided to a squadron, and then all of a sudden that system is sat in front of like 3 soldiers, and someone like me is like, hey, we need to use this. This is the Conamp. Tell me what you think. And they might come back in a couple of hours, or they might come back through the chain of command in a week or so and be like, it doesn't really do. Sometimes like, actually that has happened a couple of times, okay, which I won't name names, but they know who they are in the regiment. Sometimes it is that, we broke that, sorry. And then you might not see that bit of kit for another few months. If it's a small industry team that's developed that system, it's going to take that industry partner a few weeks or months to turn it around and fix it again. Sometimes it's a big prime and they can be like, cool, here's your replacement. And so, interacting with those industry partners has been interesting. Having them into the compound is interesting. And then even the way that a compound functions has had to change. The work, I've spoken about it a bit in other forums, but the work health and safety considerations for having autonomous and uncrewed systems is significant. And it's not until, coming from an armoured background, and last year up until November, we were ground guiding M1A1s and ASLAVs and everything around the compound, just as a normal armoured unit would. And people would see that as part of daily life, right? And then all of a sudden in January this year, February, you've got autonomous systems that you've got to be able to operate. You've got to switch them on. First parade still includes switching stuff on, making sure, track pads are all tightened and everything's as it should be on an AS4 or a remotely controlled AS4. But it's also the connectivity is there. That works. A first parade. What does a first parade mean for an autonomous system if nobody's actually in it? And then all of a sudden you have autonomous systems operating in your compound. From a CO's perspective, that is an uptick in your work health and safety focus and governance, because you're like, well, I've not really considered this. Like, what does it mean to ground? Like, if I've got a 15-ton vehicle moving around the compound, does it need to be ground guided if it's autonomous? Like, probably. But it's
maybe not as well.
Not that safe to put someone in front of a vehicle that you don't have full control over. Not that that's a scenario that we have in the compound. We have full control over everything.
But no, it's the things you have to think about.
Like, how part of our job as an experimentation unit is to inform land force design and what units across Army should adapt and how they should change to allow some of these systems to just live in your unit BAU. So that's a whole nother part of experimentation, which sometimes isn't as exciting, but is for all the commanders who are listening would agree that the governance behind some of those work health safety, the security classification, how things are stored, is significant.
And you're like, what if this happens? And we're trying to predict what will happen to the tech in the future. It's insane.
Yep.
If we go back to the warfighter, so back up to Townsville, and we're talking about in those canvas tents. If we go back to like C2 and I suppose emission control, because you talked about how many sensors how much data was sort of transmitted between in-situ aware and TAC between the forward sensors and then back to the C2. How do you go about emissions control? And also, how was it having, because normally we talk about EW or electronic warfare, we never really get to see it or we don't understand how it works. How did the sort of electronic warfare component work that you've got allocated, but also how did you go about emissions control?
Yeah, so that's another good one, right? So with all the autonomous systems comes all of the emissions, and the way that you manage that is critical. And to be honest, we still have a long way to go in how we learn to do that correctly, and each scenario is going to be different. So I think you've had people on here before that have spoken about. I know Jack Watling speaks about it in his book as well to a degree. You are now in a world, in a modern battlefield, that everybody is emitting. So it is what you emit and when, which is kind of like been known for a number of years now. It just it extenuates that problem. You do have more systems in which to operate in terms of you have more choices of what you want to emit. We have different radio systems that we can show certain tactical pictures with, and we have ways and means of hiding other things. Like, for example, if I have a small UGV instead of a retrans, right? We want to have some sort of retrans. If I have a small uncrewed ground vehicle and I want to push that out a couple of kilometres without anybody around it, I can put a small quadcopter on that and a very thin antenna below that, and I can launch it up like a tethered UAS. And there's many industry partners who can provide that to us today. That allows me a tactical retrans which is dislocated from my CP and my FLOT, like I spoke about before. I can push that out and provide some more space and time for the humans to be able to act. That can go up on a very low wattage and emit over a large distance, and that is a remote retrans that you can have very effectively using to show any sort of picture you want or receive information on SCEDs. It can close down, come back in, and then without moving any humans from any tactical position.
And I imagine it looks the same as any other sort of drone. Like you're trying to use deceit to keep it looking similar. Yep. And then also, like if it gets taken out of the sky, you haven't lost a retrans debt.
Yeah.
You've lost a platform.
Yep.
So you talked about Colonel Smith discussing how we should look at drone usage and that it's expendable ammunition type.
Absolutely.
It's like that's much the same, using a different type of retrans that can be targeted and at low cost, I suppose. Low cost when
I mean, in comparison, right?
Yeah.
Cost in terms of like if you model what I just said against a normal retrans debt, which a lot of people listening would have been a part of at some point. One, give me a UGV with a tethered UAS any day of the week as opposed to sitting around a Clark mast. Two, just the threat that you're now exposing your force to is just cost alone. That is a significant saving. You just want to make sure that you protect human life as much as you can, and put those are the sort of, when people say like the dull and dangerous tasks, those are the sorts of things you want to be able to get after first, and we are getting after first in terms of changing the force and providing options to units as opposed to the traditional Clark mast setup. So without going into a full set of details, that would probably make my S6 just pass out with nausea because I'm probably explaining it very poorly. There are other systems that we have that can allow us to breadcrumb a certain tactical picture. So by that I mean we know that someone's looking, so we can use trellis-ware radios and other types of radios which allow us to really put meaning behind the term EMS maneuver, because we can show exactly what we want someone else to see, and we can use it as part of a demonstration effectively. But you don't necessarily need emerging technology to do that sort of stuff. The stuff that I saw 3 Brigade do on the North Queensland War Fighter with the way that they manage their MCON from the centre is not, I've never seen it before across the Army at that scale anyway. And I think it's absolutely fantastic. And it's just, that's just a brigade understanding what they have, understanding the risk, and then using different ways and means of painting a tactical picture through the EMS spectrum for an enemy to observe. And they did it fantastically from what I saw.
Yeah, that's absolutely awesome. I think that's the thing. You talked about the interplay between the S6, your S6 at the time, but like generalize it out, and then the maneuver space, like achieving maneuver sort of tactical tasks on the basis of like comms understanding and what the S6 gives you. I think that's the ultimate, like that's what we're trying to achieve. Deception, shock and surprise on the basis of some of that emissions sort of deception or control, you know what I mean? Like that's the idea to get to that point, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's really difficult to do. And that's another area where we kind of, through wargaming, we can say, all right, well, so we've painted this picture, the DSTG team sort of validate that picture's logical, it would logically occur. The enemy sees, and then, during that wargame, the information that's fed to the enemy party is the picture that we've laid out. And it's a very difficult thing to do. And to be honest, like most areas that we're finding and the sort of experimentation that we're looking at on behalf of Army headquarters, more and more it identifies what we don't know. And I would suggest that we don't know a lot, as much as we probably think we do in terms of how we can actually capitalize on EMS maneuver. In terms of EW, which you spoke about, we can replicate those systems again through wargaming and the different ways and means that some of those systems can be used. I think what you'll see in the very near term is EW capabilities being pushed lower. We kind of all know that it needs to be at a lower tactical level. For a long time, we've had very few EW assets and a very protected, important strategic assets placed around the land force. I think, in the mid-term, you'll probably see a proliferation of EW assets at a lower level because that's part of what we've got to get after.
Yeah, awesome. So that's I think C2 ISR. I asked a few questions, so we really laboured the point. It was absolutely awesome. But then, so if we go to fires, I imagine you're as part of 3 Brigade, but no doubt they're doing an assault or a tactical action that's quite large in brigade size. So they've got 4 engine support and the gun batteries are allocated to each of the battle groups. Did you get a gun battery allocated? Or what organic fires assets did you use and what did you do with them?
Yeah. So for our first sort of iteration, as being an experimentation group bolt on the side of a brigade level warfighter, we didn't integrate too much with their fire plan, with their traditional fire plan, for a number of reasons. But what I really wanted to do and what we ended up doing was seeing how we could use precision loitering munitions. Some of them organic to the combat team level, some of them that would be launched by someone like 20 Reg, like at a rear area, and passed forward through the TAC system to a team on the ground to try and take the pressure off of the traditional offensive support capabilities. So what that allowed us to do was really understand, again, it is finding out the gaps in our knowledge and the gaps in our C2 system. So for example, we have an Our Bravo det, so one-way loitering munition Bravo, which is made by a company over in Perth. Many people would have seen them before. We've got a det going and attaching to 20 Reg on Talisman Sabre. They've got 2 platforms they'll use, and that's going to start to help 20 Reg get towards a seek and strike capability. But that's an Our Bravo, it's got a roughly 7 kilogram warhead. It flies 200 kilometers. That's a big thing. It's a couple of meters long, wide, launches off the same rail as the integrator. So where should that sit? It's probably a division asset because it goes so far. Nobody's got a tail or an AO at the battle group level that's that far. But it's how many of those systems do we have? What's the priority of fire support? It falls back to the traditional controls that we already have, which just, in my mind, reinforces the systems that we use at the moment are so valid. What's the trigger for release? What's the priority of fire support for the one-way loitering munition? Why? What's sort of the target? What's the HPT, HVT list, and what are we releasing it for? What are we not releasing it for? How does it fit into a targeting cycle at the brigade level? And how do we get that? So when it launches at a rail in the rear area, how does that blue dot travel through the C2 system and end up on a TAC end user device on a JTAC or a corporal's chest as they're about to strike a target to enable another tactical action? So that allowed us to really play that system out at multiple levels, down like Our Bravo, Switchblade, some other things, and it meant that vital assets like 4 Reg could theoretically remain below the detection threshold for longer. They can mass for more significant effects, and the way that the brigade commander apportions those offensive support assets is just another tool that the commander has to be able to make the tactical situation move to their advantage.
That's awesome. So you actually had like drones flying in that were sort of had a mortar cage on the bottom of it that could carry it. And I'm really simplifying it, but they would pass over the float and into target area with a TAC, JFTs or JTACs.
Theoretically, in a wargame situation, we did, yes. Yes. On Talisman Sabre, we will look to replicate that. We've done that in the past. We did it on on a demonstration in September last year in Puckapunyal. So we know that we can physically do it. Again, like I said before, we've played with that system. We understand the system. We think it's the way forward that we want to go, at least in part, or the theory of that precision loitering munition is definitely the way that we want to go forward, with the platform sort of agnostic. So then it comes down to, using it in the war game, theoretically we did, yes.
Yeah. And passing that target data back, you're still thinking about how to get all the C2 structure in place to be able to have organic fires, I suppose, in that sense. Yeah. If we move to fires, if we move to manoeuvre and mobility, I think you did a breach and then some stability operations in an urban structure. Can you talk us through how this must be the bread and butter type stuff, but how is it different in the manoeuvre and mobility space, being that it's an experiment?
Honestly, it's not that different in terms of the tactical tasks and the way that you would approach them. All the same considerations remain. The same considerations for the attack, for the defence. They are all things that we will and we must continue to focus on and become experts at, because we are in an era where we have systems that can enhance what we do, and that a way that they enhance it is through the forward line of own robots and forward line of own sensors that I spoke about. But we're not yet, as a global military, our partners as well, I would suggest aren't there yet when we're in terms of replacing the tactical tasks as we know them. With the manoeuvre and mobility piece, that becomes difficult when you, again, talk about power generation and the way that you can project a force that is reliant on electricity and reliant on fuel at the same time sometimes, if it's a hybrid vehicle of some form. And I think people, when I say hybrid vehicle, a lot of the greater general public will be like, oh, it's an environmentally friendly thing. Sure, it is probably that. But in reality, it is the fact that you can send something forward that has the ability to power everything else that you need to power, and can also sustain your force through power distribution, like a giant hub. Anybody who's been full driving will know that Red Arc and the way that their power management systems are, you live or die on that when you're camping.
Yeah.
Obviously, the same thing goes for us. We have the Red Arc system in some of our vehicles, souped up versions of it. So mobility and manoeuvre for me as a commander really starts to rest back on that. How can I sustain a force that's got to do an 80k march from point A to point B, and then be ready for a tactical action when we get there? What are the other considerations that I need to involve in terms of the logistics allocation for that power distribution? When you have automated weaponry, the rate of fire and the rate of ammunition that you need to carry to sustain that fire is significantly increased. What does that mean for your logistics chain? How are you going to get that forward? So where you solve one problem, right? You have a forward line of own robots, and you solve a problem like I've reduced the direct threat on a human team, which means that the likelihood of CASEVAC is lower for a portion of time. But you've just increased another problem, which is, okay, I've got 5 UGVs out there, all of them with 7.62 miniguns on them. That's 1,000 rounds every 10 seconds if I want to fire it. How am I sustaining that and reloading it? How am I fixing that if it has a stoppage? Do I care if it has a stoppage and I just move another one up? So these things are great in manoeuvre and they do help breaches, but again, it's like air superiority. You can do something, you can surge something and own it for a short period of time in a tactical task, and then it sort of dips below the usability sort of threshold again, and you've got to set conditions for it to be used tactically again at another time and space. It's certainly not the fact that robots just come in and fix everything. It's all trade-offs. It all continues to be trade-offs and risk.
I think the power thing is interesting because we have conventional munitions now. If we look at going forward into robots firing lasers to really make an arbitrary understanding, the power it takes is only increases the liability on power generation in the field and getting it forward and stuff as well. So a shift from conventional munitions to some laser guided air defense, for example, or some laser air defense or something along those lines is just increasing that power demand phenomenal. Significantly. Yeah,
I can't articulate it. I know that the US, I think, put for public release recently, they put I think it was a 50 watt or 50 megawatt laser on a striker. The power required to make that laser work is phenomenal. I don't understand it. I don't really know what it would be in terms of wattage. I'm assuming it's a fair bit.
Yeah.
How do you it's great, directed energy weapons, awesome. Let's get some. But then how do we make them work? And what does it mean? So another one, right? Let's take a drone gun. A lot of militaries use drone guns. We see them at things like major sporting events in some countries as well. We can buy them off the shelf. I've got a pallet of them from Army headquarters recently in the warehouse, in the Q store. But
sorry, is stuff just rocking up, or do you actually know things are coming before they get there?
That is part of our adaptation to experimentation unit. Is you just have stuff arrive. All in you get told it's coming, but my QM is working hard.
Yeah, I can imagine.
He's doing a fantastic job, and I've relied on his experience and the experience of his team and WOCON to be able to, and the RQ to be able to manage that. But that has been a problem, right? Stuff just starts to arrive in an experimentation unit, and you've got to figure out what it is. Sometimes it's not immediately obvious what it is. where it goes, who it's meant for, who it's come from. So yeah, it can sometimes be a bit random, but that's part of the storming and norming of an experimentation unit as it's adapting from a traditional armoured unit, I guess. So back to my point though, a pallet full of drone guns arrives. Drone guns are a directed energy weapon of sorts. They have RF requirements and they have fill requirements. So therefore, they're a controlled HSI item. I don't have a safe big enough at the moment to be able to house all those things. That means something else for the infrastructure that a unit has to hold, right? It's not just be like, let's get drone guns out into everybody. It's the considerations of the governance of that system as well. We've got to be able to safely hold it, put a fill into it, make it work correctly, and then when it doesn't work, have a way of fixing it. And also, again, like anything, it can work for a period and then you've got to recharge it, or you've got to, give it a power supply of some form.
Yeah. I think you talked about the QM working hard. I think your S6 is also working really hard trying to get all this stuff working.
Yeah. The S6, but he loves work. That's fine.
That's awesome.
I got the right one.
Just before we move on from the maneuver piece, with the breaching component, obviously one of the most vulnerable tactical tasks that any manoeuvrers can go through, I suppose. How is you gave a vignette before we got on the episode about MICLICs and then subsequently going to something that significantly enhances the experience a bit more and makes it a little bit quicker and less risky, I suppose, potentially. Can you just talk through what sort of tech is sort of emerging, and you're at the forefront of this sort of stuff, but what tech is emerging in the breaching space?
Yep. So there is some stuff that we see our partners doing on things like PCC5 and I'm sure
Project Convergence
5, which I know you've spoken a bit about on the podcast before, and moving into next year in PCC6. Our partners are focusing on that significantly in terms of autonomous breaching. So there are systems, I can't recall the name of them, but they like similar to what I described before with the tethered communications retrans drone. UGV moves out into a breach site. It launches a quadcopter which has a hose. It lays the hose exactly over where you want the breach site to be. It fills the hose with an explosive slurry. It blows it up. We're probably talking about 7 to 10 minutes roughly. That's just one of many systems. There's also other drones in a swarming capability that can come in and blow a lane and then also mark the lane behind it exactly where you want it to be. There are definite ways and means that we can enhance our land force with autonomous breaching systems. I think that, again, what it does for me is it really highlights the opportunity of some things that we can get after as an army, and they're kind of known, like we've seen our partners using them. Doesn't mean that, the first Armoured Regiment existed experimentation unit under AUKUS Pillar 2. So the fantastic thing about that is that we can go to things like Project Convergence. We can get the data, we can get the information, we can be involved in the experimentation of what I just described and watch a live fire autonomous breach of a large obstacle belt and not have to do much about it until we want to do something about it. Resources and taxpayer money has to be apportioned correctly. We can get everything we need out of that experimentation by being involved in PCCs into the future and the previous ones, and drag that back for our knowledge and continue to work with our partners to make sure that we're up to speed with what they're doing next. And then we just know that there's a system there that if we need it, we can grab it. The other thing that it does for me is it highlights the importance of what things like 2CAV are doing, units like 2CAV are doing at the moment, and the engineers up in 3 Brigade. The Under Armour breaching capability that's been introduced into Army remains the backbone of everything that we're doing. What I'm referring to certainly enhances it. It might provide, if we were to acquire a system like what I just described, that would provide the brigade commander another asset with which to employ. It's fantastic to allow greater means of deception, because then you've got multiple forces to move into a potential breach locations, and it's going to force multiple dilemmas on an enemy party that's trying to monitor that breach. But the requirement to focus on the tactics that we are currently focusing on as a land force, and a key one for 3 Brigade in particular being that Under Armour breaching, is never going away. The importance of SOSRA, even in what I just described, you can't just send a robot out there to do the task for you without the correct suppression and obscuration. Like that sort of stuff has to be there. It's whilst we learn things and we see how we can enhance it with emerging technology, for me at the moment, it still just reinforces that what we're doing is so important.
So if we talk about, so that's maneuver mobility, and then we delve deep into the breach and those sort of more risky tactical tasks. I suppose if we come back to protecting our own forces, what sort of the use of concealment, counter UAS, electronic warfare vulnerabilities and stuff, how did you go about protecting your force, coming back to fighting an enemy, but coming back to the OPFOR?
Yep. So both in the offense and in the defense primarily, what I described before in terms of the forward line of own troops, forward line of own robots, forward line of own sensors, that allows us to place human teams under greater concealment in some cases, either both offensively and defensively. What that means is that we can take sort of important and sometimes rare assets for air defense, including counter UAS in this example, and group them exactly where they need to be. So it's like, the same principles that we learn on things like COAC, RMC, the subject courses that people do in terms of you can have an air defense asset at a certain bubble, so it's got a certain range and a certain lethality range and all that sort of stuff. You have to operate within that, and it's another tactical consideration that allows us to group humans together, place some counter UAS capabilities around them, both kinetic and non-kinetic, which means that we can provide greater protection to the humans that are part of that human machine team.
Yeah, excellent. I'm talking about, because this links with your previous point about generating power forward and then protecting. How did you go about using, I suppose it's difficult to get to the point where you really test CSS, but how did you go about testing sustainment and protecting it, I suppose? Because it's difficult to know where they should sit. We talked about the proliferation of information forward of, the enemy is likely to see you within kilometres of the flot and forward line of own robots. I love that term. But so how did you go about testing sustainment?
Yeah, so it's one of the biggest learning areas out of the whole thing, to be honest. Sustainment and fires for me, I think, were some of the key areas. Sustainment, there are still so many things that we need to focus on. And this is the other thing about experimentation, right? We are an experimentation unit focused on emerging technology on behalf of Army Headquarters, but every logistician that I know is getting after sustainment experimentation. DG Log and the team in Army Headquarters, the things that they're doing with AI tracked logistics, focusing on airborne delivery systems, surface, subsurface delivery systems. There are some of the smartest people I know in Army getting after these problems, and there needs to be, right? Because it's a combined effort. It's not just. I really want to send the message. It's not just First Armoured doing this stuff. Everybody is doing this stuff. We have different ways and means and some other resources which allow us to do slightly different things. But I know my mates who are commanding CISBs and FSBs are focused highly on this stuff. So that's probably the first point. The second one is, like I mentioned just before, it's probably the largest area that has the biggest adaptation. So to describe that for me was one night during the North Queensland War Fighter, my logistician commander came across and she had come up with a scheme manoeuvre which was going to support our tactical action, which we're moving into. And part of the back brief prior to the rock drill, she came up and she was like, this is how I want to array the forces. And she presented this TAOR boundary and requesting an extension. And it was about the size of a traditional battle group AO. And it was one of those moments that I found myself I was like staring at the map for like 2 or 3 minutes, and she was just like staring at me, waiting for a decision, rightfully. And I wasn't at all questioning what she had presented, but in my mind, it was like I had traditionally thought of a certain size tail for a CISB, for a support
CSS
element. CSS element in support of an armoured battle group means a tail is about this size, means they operate in about this thing, and all my experience in 20 years has told me this. And it's looking at it and like trying to functionally dislocate my own thought process to be like what would originally be like, that is the worst boundary I've ever seen in my life, to like actually know in the way that you're looking to employ your systems.
Dispersing the force, keeping it as far back as
exactly what the log team have done, right? They're like, okay, so if we equip a CSS element as part of a battle group, as we should do for the maneuver elements. So by that I mean FPVs, for example, aren't just something that should be involved at the front line. They have something to give in all areas, like a 66 or any armoured weapon or any personnel weapon. If we equip them correctly with the right sensors, if we equip them correctly with the right C2 management systems, and as I mentioned before, DG Log's getting after a lot of that sort of gear, and if we equip them with the right autonomous vehicles, then they can really disperse into small teams that can come together en masse, rapidly deliver the CSS effect that we need at the right point in time, and then disperse, because their ability to have a reliable detection capability is enhanced so much by some of the emerging technology that we already have and we know is on the horizon within the next 6 to 12 months. So that fundamentally for me changes the CSS game at the battle group and above level. Like, it's phenomenal.
So did you say yes then? Looking at this massive boundary?
Get after it. After about 5 minutes, like eye twitching, I was like, go do that. No, and they did it, like, and that's the sort of stuff that we need at the regiment, right? We need new ideas and people that are coming in, even from traditional backgrounds, and understanding what they can, bringing their frustrations with them in some cases, of being like, this has always annoyed me that we have to do it this way. I've identified a new system or a new TTP in support of this system that allows us to disperse CSS, raise our own detection capabilities, and actually have like some teeth, right? Have the ability to fight back when we need to. And if one smaller node of a CSS team is under threat, that means that the other parts of my logistics chain remain below the detection threshold, or can move as a result of what's happening to that one smaller system. So I think everything we see, and that speaks to everything. It speaks to the EMS, the way the EMS is structured. It speaks to the C2 and the knowledge that needs to go through the battle group CP, in this example through CSS and the sustainment requirements that we need. And it means, what does it mean for the size of the AO that a battle group needs into the future? Because if we have the maneuver elements that have now robots and sensors in support of them, we have a logistics chain which can stretch over such a larger area if we need it to, and can remain below a detection threshold with its own ability to defend itself inherently, and its own ability to be able to identify its threats coming towards it inherently to itself. Then that really means that we can harden the whole system, put it below the enemy detection threshold when we need it to be, and mass it for the correct force at time and space that we need it to be in.
So you talked about, so that's obviously the boundaries, like significantly larger boundaries, and how to sort of fight CSS in a more dispersed nature and thinning out and all the like. If we come back to, you've talked a couple of times about how flexible your team needs to be to try out these new capabilities, but also the concept of their employment. What does a unit look like now that you made a shift to an experiment unit?
Yep. Yeah. So we had to adapt a little bit. We've gone from about 400-ish last year, 450-ish, to about a third of that, roughly, give or take. We have still A, B, and C squadrons, so Tango 1, Tango 2, Tango 3. We also have a Circat 5 squadron, which is focused in towards the 2nd Division's mission set for 3rd 9th Light Horse South Australian Mounted Rifles. They are in Chevelle Line, so they're part of our compound. They parade every Tuesday night, as you'd expect, and they're getting after some amazing stuff. They're not experimentation per se. They're obviously light cavalry focused, but the things that they are doing in their line of effort for the 2nd Division is been excellent, and they're really being able to ramp up their activity for the JTGs and about to deploy in Talisman Sabre, and riding off the back of excellent work that's been done by the leadership teams that have come before them as well in that organisation to be able to really generate a good light cavalry capability. And then we have the experimentation side of the unit, so we're kind of wearing two hats, separate lines of effort. For the experimentation line of effort, two manoeuvre squadrons and a CSS focused squadron, they all do experimentation of various forms.
Yeah, so that's your CSS element is not just supporting the manoeuvre; they're trialling and experimenting themselves.
Yeah. At the moment, we're in a bit of a dip in terms of experimentation platforms, but as I said before, right, sometimes that's for multiple reasons. It's contractors, it's industry partners and what they have and haven't been able to provide in the short term, and the way that we work with them and DSTG and academia to bring forward other systems and platforms focus on sustainment in that example. So at the moment they are flat out we're about to deploy on Talisman Sabre, right? So they're driving all of our assets to and from the respective mounting areas for Talisman Sabre in Queensland and Darwin. So they're doing traditional CSS functions, and that's their main effort. For the very short term, but they have the capability, and they have done in the past, like for the North Queensland War Fighter, focus on experimentation as well, which is really important, and that's somewhere that will grow with additive manufacturing in the midterm as well, and the ability, like everything I said, tactically employing dispersed echelons, dispersed CSS capabilities as well. So we do have an echelon focused experiment coming up in Q4 this year, so that'll be a big thing for that team.
That's awesome. So I suppose before we close out too, we went through your North Queensland War Fighter and your part in that, the complete change in focus, I suppose, from achieving training levels to now experimentation and testing concepts of employment on different bits of kit. You're getting thrown heaps of stuff and your soldiers playing with them and sometimes breaking them. But yeah, we go through that whole thing, and then upcoming activities and what you're getting after. So if we come back to the broader scheme of the episode, which is combat experimentation, you just explain exactly what combat experimentation is and how it differs from the way Army does the rest of its business.
Yeah. So, going through the change, the adaptation for the 1st Armoured Regiment, we sort of like, what does experimentation mean for the Army, right? And we have adopted the title of Combat Experimentation Group or Combat Experimentation Unit. I often use group because, like I've said through this whole episode, we cannot ever do anything alone. We have to rely on the opportunities given to us by other teams across the 2nd Division within 9 Brigade as well, where we currently sit, and also other brigades like 3 Brigade in the North Queensland War Fighter example. We have to work with DSTG inherently. We are tied directly to the Robotics Implementation and Coordination Office. Like, the experimentation unit doesn't work without that group of other teams around it supporting it. So it really is a group effort to get towards the experimentation outcomes. For me, the title of combat experimentation, what it does is, I was speaking to a friend the other day who she's been helping us out from DSTG, and she was like, experimentation can mean different things to different people. For us, it was providing the logic and the grounded reality of combat scenarios and combat mindset into the fantastic world of emerging technology, right? It's easy to get swept up in some of the possibilities. When you go to industry events, it's easy to get swept up in some of the business development capabilities that are out there. But really bringing that back into, all right, so we have this piece of emerging tech, let's put it in a combat scenario with people who are experienced in combat scenarios, at least in training or otherwise, and actually make sure that this piece of emerging technology answers a threat question that we're trying to get after, satisfies a hypothesis that we think might work, and ultimately informs land force design and FLW. So what changes does the Army, or should the Army, look to make to adapt to the prevalence of emerging technology? For me, that's different. Like, if you have a trial is you've got a piece of equipment, you think you want to probably put it into service. You've got some very specific questions about that. We have a trials troop that comes together. Not we, 1st Armoured Regiment, but the Army brings together trials capabilities and supports that trial. Experimentation is focused on what could come next, what should come next, and why. If it should not come next, why not? So in doing that, it's really important to also embrace the art of failure. Like, that's been one of the toughest things, to be able to, not the art of failure, that's probably not the right way to put it. Put the art behind failure.
No, but I know what you mean, because we always want to succeed, and you want to get into command and achieve all the things you want to achieve. You have this awesome list, and you normally deliver a directive that details them, and everyone gets after it. Sometimes you might fail at everything.
It's probably the biggest thing, well, one of the biggest mindset shifts, and the cultural difference of the unit. Seeing it, you can go out and you can have the most fantastic activity and everything fails. And inherently, you are, as an Army officer in our example, and like every Army leader, you want to succeed. You have such a drive, even if you don't think so. The moment that failure is on the immediate horizon, you are uncomfortable with that. I almost guarantee it. So it's a constant battle. Like we said before the episode started, my RSM pulled me up on it yesterday during a meeting where I was like, no, that's got to happen. He's like, no, this is not embracing. Like, we have to be able to set these conditions that we might fail in this activity we're about to go and do. So it's like, that's a very difficult thing to sort of stomach sometimes. But again, working alongside DSTG, when we fail and DSTG they're there to witness it, that's where the money is. That's where the most learning occurs. I've been with DSTG partners who like are cheering when a failure comes through, because it's like, well, that's where the bulk of the learning is done. So yeah, that's been a big mindset shift. So the regiment is, we don't have any IAT throughput. We have no lieutenants. We only have, I think the most junior soldier we have in the regiment has been in the Army for 2 years and one of the clerks. And that means that we have a relative level of experience, and we rely on that experience to use both individual and small team experiences to inform what might come next for future land warfare. So it's a fantastic space to be in. And anybody who's come off the back of Talisman Sabre and loves the Army, wants to stay in the Army, but wants to have a bit of a different approach, I would strongly suggest speaking to your career manager about what options might reside in the 1st Armoured Regiment.
That's good. The recruiting plug as well. So That's awesome. No, absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Obviously, went through a warfighter based on experimentation. We came back to how much preparation it goes through, sort of the walk, crawl, run in a different sense to get to that point. We didn't even talk about FPV drones, but I can only imagine throwing
they're coming, live fire.
I can only imagine someone throwing on a headset and trying to fly it, just being like, wow, this is really difficult. And certain things. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely awesome. Thanks, sir.
Thanks very much for the opportunity, mate. I love what you do. It's a great setup. Thanks,
sir. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Cove Podcast. Explore our channel for more great audio PME content. Also, visit us at cove.army.gov.au for hundreds of additional resources. The Cove, the learning home of the Australian profession of arms.